Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour with my friend and yours, the goatiest of all F1 minds to have ever goated, the one that they call Mr. Peter D. Windsor. How are you doing, good sir?
I'm very good, thanks, Cam. Busy weekend, but here we are.
Good man, good man. As is customary then, Mr. Windsor, I will ask my first question this way. What was the biggest story to come out of the Brazilian Grand Prix round 21 this weekend past?
Well, I'd like to say in some ways, just to give Lando his due, Lando taking another giant leap towards the World Championship. To back Mexico up with what he did in Brazil was outstanding. But inevitably, this race will be remembered for the drive of Max Verstappen from the pit lane. You always sense that something was going to happen when Max is in the pit lane, and it's a circuit like Brazil particularly. The only thing that didn't come into play was the weather, but still Max delivered, didn't he? He delivered for the crowd, for the team, for himself, for the championship, for Formula One. And it couldn't have happened in a better place, really. I think the Brazilians just embraced that as they would one of their own. And for Max to go into the lead, he had a lead. And there was a moment when you thought, maybe he'll stay out on those mediums. He's got sort of 8 seconds and something could happen. Safety car, he could win this thing. But Red Bull made that call to bring him in and put him on some softs and really let him sprint to the finish. And it was a good call, I think. And as we know, there was no safety car, so it was a good call. And it got him back to P3. And that was a pretty good result, really, from where he was.
But was it a good call, Peter? Because
you
think so?
I think it was. I mean, I've been a bit critical of Red Bull in various times this year of their call, but that was really 50-50. And there was no telling how his tyres were starting to go off. And the last message Max had with the team before that stop was, I don't really care what you're telling me about George Russell. The tyres are going off big time. I need to sort this out. And so when that happened, I think, there was still enough time to get him on the softs, as we know. The only question mark really was how he would go on the softs, because they hadn't really been very good on the Red Bull all year and all weekend. And but of course, it was a different track then, and it was a different car. It was a lighter car and a very light car, and it was a greener track. It was a less green track. There was more groove. And as long as he kept it away from the debris offline, and so long as he did his usual brilliant tyre management to extend that stint as long as he could, he was going to have a lot of grip to fight back with and put them under pressure. And he did. They both came in, and it was a good race.
Mr. Windsor, why didn't Red Bull seek to extend the mediums? Because it's almost like they fell upon fortuitous circumstances with the puncture of Max Verstappen, pitted him and got off the really bad, hard compound tyres. Why didn't they do one medium stint, followed shortly thereafter by another medium stint? A lot of people in the paddock said that potentially, had Max done that strategy, that he would have optimised for his chances of winning the race.
I think he ran, I don't get that, because I think the first stint he ran on mediums, he used them very hard. He passed a lot of cars. He was in a lot of traffic. And when they brought him in, he was going off like a second a lap, and there was no way he could stay out for any longer on that first medium stint. And as just described what happened with the second one, the tyres started to go off the cliff very quickly, partly because how hard he was having to drive the car, not in terms of sliding it and doing this and that, just the amount of energy he was putting through the tyres going that quickly. And I think it was the right call. I didn't see that at all. I think they managed that race really well, and it was a very good strategy Red Bull used. Excellent. And just fortuitous, as you say, that they started him on the hard, so they got rid of that straight away, and then he could have those 2 mediums. And he maximised everything he could on those 2 stints, but I don't think he could have got any more out of them. I think it was done correctly.
Fair, Peter. So go on, let me...
The only thing I would say, I mean, if people want to criticise their strategy, I come back to Q1, and I would have had him out on mediums for the entirety of Q1. Just to let the car settle on mediums, get a time good enough to get into Q2, and then faff about with the softs. But I wouldn't have put him out on 2 new softs like that. And I said that at the time after qualifying. I think that was the one mistake they made. And given how good the car was on the mediums, I think I was probably right.
I mean, you say the car was good though, Peter. I mean, in the end, in the race, but it took, again, that car, we know that RB21 is mercurial and needs some setting up. And it's not the first time Red Bull have gone headfirst into a sprint race weekend, not knowing how to set up a car in Interlagos, mention no names, 2022, and Spa-Francorchamps that same year. Why do Red Bull drop the ball and then the next day rock up at the race, break part firme, and all of a sudden have a car that can win races and potentially championships, Peter?
Well, I think it's misleading, if I can say that, to talk about setup. It's not setup. It's getting the tyres to work in the correct window. That's okay. There are things you can do to adjust that. But it's not setup in the traditional concept of setup, i.e. springs, dampers, ride height, roll bar, all that stuff. It's not that, or wings. It's getting the tyres to work, which is a black art. It's a magical or ferocious black art, however you want to look at it. And the opposite extreme is Alpine. Why did Alpine suddenly have grip in Interlagos? Not because they did a massive amount of homework and got the setup absolutely right as much as they could within their own parameters. It's because magically they got the tyres to work. They don't know why, any more than Red Bull don't know why the tyres didn't work up until the race. That's the Pirelli thing. It's a Pirelli tyre thing, and it's to do with not understanding the dynamics of the tyre, of the teams not understanding. And the reason the teams don't understand the dynamics of the tyre in the way that, say, Ross Brawn and Michael Schumacher understood the dynamics of the Bridgestone tyre in their era is because Pirelli don't give the information out because they're in a monopoly, and it might help some teams more than another. So the teams are working in a black art thing. And if you talk to any driver, any engineer away from a microphone, which is the only way to talk to them these days, all of them will go on about Pirelli and how difficult it is to get the tyres to work. Now, one car consistently throughout the year has managed to get the tyres to work pretty well everywhere, and that's McLaren. And that's because McLaren have a more efficient aero package than any other team on the grid. And because they have more grip at any given moment, they've got a bigger platform with which to play, in which to try to get the tyres to work. But they have their moments when they don't have grip. I don't think Lando had a lot of grip in his first set of tyres in Q3. And so it goes on. That's what was going on at Red Bull. They just didn't know. It wasn't a question of setup. They didn't know how to get the tyres to work. And maybe it meant running them cooler than they were, or hotter, or different preparation. They probably don't know, even today, any more than Alpine don't know why they were relatively quick in Brazil. That's what it is. And I think people talk a lot about setup because that is, it's one of the catchwords of Formula One, but it's not that. It's black art, believe me.
You don't think the ride height had a part to play in that, because it looked very jacked up?
Yeah, I mean, Max was complaining from minute one about the ride and terrible. I mean, obviously ride height, like other things you can adjust on the car, plays a part, but it's not the first time he's had problems with bouncing and a poor ride height, and he still managed to get out of Q1. Let's face it, we're talking about a car not able to get out of Q1 driven by Max Verstappen. That's what we're talking about. Think about that. That is not ride height. That's not setup. That is the tyres not working, not giving any grip at all. And they don't know why that is. And it's not something that they can probably ever understand. As I say, there's not enough information out there. I don't even know if Pirelli have enough information. They don't need to do the sort of forensic dynamic analysis that Bridgestone and Michelin used to have to do when they're in competition. But why do they need to? As long as the tyres are relatively strong and bulletproof, which they are, congratulations to Pirelli, and so long as they have a tyre that fits the prospectus of Formula One, which is, let's have tyres that keep falling off the cliff in case the race is really boring, then we can break it up with pit stops, which is what F1 tell them they want. As long as they fulfill those two requirements, Pirelli are doing their job, and they're in there doing a fabulous job with PR and advertising and support and all the stuff they do behind the scenes, which is great. So that's it. There's no information out there. And that's why everybody goes from one race to another wondering whether they're going to be in the sweet spot or not. Look at George Russell. He couldn't get the tyres to work all weekend.
No. Do they need to bring back another tyre manufacturer?
Well, I mean, that's another thing. That'll never happen, of course, because we're lucky to have even one that thinks Formula One is good value for money, let alone another tyre company thinking the same thing. So I don't think that'll happen. It all ended when Ross Brawn, who then went on to run Liberty, accused Michelin of flagrant cheating in Formula One. And Michelin pulled out a year later as a result, as they would. Bridgestone in Monopoly said, well, this is a bit ridiculous. We're just racing against ourselves. There's only a downside to that. We'll get out as well. Then Bernie said, we haven't got any tyre suppliers. I'm going to buy Avon again and everybody can buy tyres from me. Or maybe you can run Pirelli. I could maybe do a deal with Pirelli. And they'll say, oh yeah, do the Pirelli deal, Bernie. And here we are.
Yeah.
If we treated the tyre companies with a little bit more respect when we had them, then we'd probably still have a tyre war, which would be fabulous, but we don't.
Peter, you mentioned about Lando Norris doing everything that was expected of him. I feel like at this juncture, I've got to eat some humble pie because over the past couple of weeks, I've called into question not Lando's ability necessarily, but his ability to execute in the most pressurised circumstances. And he's been, as near as makes no difference, perfect for the past 3 Grand Prix. Is this now Lando's championship to lose?
Yeah, I don't think he was perfect in Austin, but certainly Mexico and Brazil have been outstandingly good. Of course, it's his championship to lose now. Putting aside power unit failures, oil leaks, whatever, it's his championship to lose. And he's driving beautifully. And you can tell it in his body language, his tone, when he speaks. He's very much more into being Lando Norris now rather than having to worry about Oscar. He feels he's got Oscar now and he doesn't have to worry about him anymore, which is the mindset he should have had from the start of the year rather than just in the last 4 or 5 races. And it's showing, Oscar's getting more ragged by the race, really. And yeah, he's looking like the world champion. And if he wins the championship, he will thoroughly deserve to do so.
Oof. What did you make of Lando in quali saying that he's taking tighter lines with a view to reduce risk now, that he's now purveying the risk management landscape in real time? That feels like it's different from Lando, doesn't it? In addition to the fact that he's no longer bottling the starts, he's been perfect, Peter.
Well, I didn't see or hear about that, but it sounds like he was probably asked some sort of question about line, I would imagine. And it sounds like they were going around in circles, excuse the pun, because, yeah, you can take a more conservative line and look after the tyres and look after the car more than perhaps you might at the start of the year. That's fine. And that's something that you can see drivers doing. But in terms of being a short corner driver, or let me rephrase that, in terms of having all the tools he needs in order to create earlier entries and extend the straight into the corner and extend the straight out of the corner, Lando's still a long, long way from, say, Max Verstappen. And so line is not that significant. You can just say, well, let's save the car here. But as I've said before, Max Verstappen could drive round into Lagos on Lando Norris lines or even Carlos Sainz lines and probably lap within 1 or 2 tenths of his best using short corners. 1 or 2 tenths. But it wouldn't be far away. I mean, line is not that important. Much more important is the rate of inputs of the driver to the car, keeping the car flat to the surface of the road so all 4 tyres are working well, and being very supple and flexible with your inputs and creating a lovely sweet spot in which you can play with the variables going in. That's what it's all about. And the line is secondary. So when I think line is probably something that TV companies love to have because it's quite a nice graphic to show this guy's turning in like this and this guy's got an apex there or whatever they want to do. It's kind of irrelevant. It's all about the rates of input of the drivers. Max Verstappen would not be able to do what he does with corners and create the rotation point when he does. Let's not talk about an apex. If he didn't have all those other tools, the incredibly soft touch, the suppleness, the feel, everything that he has, the rate of input, his perfect harmony with the dynamic weight of the car, which Ayrton Senna always used to talk about. That's what Max has. And that's not, I imagine, what Lando was talking about. But I would make one, and I think a final point on that. If you look at Max in the race, when he was really on it, and finally the tyres were giving him some sort of feel and grip when he was on the mediums, and again right at the end in the softs. Going into turn 1, he's actually, in terms of short corners, he's actually very wide, much wider than Lando going in there. Why? because he's already thinking about the change of direction in the middle between 1 and 2, and he wants to make sure as he's got to that change of direction point, he's got the car traveling straight for as long as possible, so he doesn't overload it either way. And that's why Max is always so quick out of turn 2 and down the straight there, out of 3. He's only thinking of the change of direction. He's not thinking of turn 1's apex and how to get in early or whatever they're thinking about. It's very easy to get in early into turn 1. It's cambered. It invites you to do it. But that's not what it's all about. Max Verstappen, that's the one place where he doesn't go in early. Interesting, isn't it?
Double clicking on the Lando circumstance again, though, very quickly, Peter. What do you make of the F1 community who's still saying of Lando that he's a fast car merchant? That he'll be very, if he does win the Drivers' Championship, that he'd be very undeserving. That if you had Max in there, that Lando wouldn't see which way he went. And again, you get Lando getting booed roundly by the Brazilian contingent when he's on the podium. Them singing the Max Verstappen song, Max Verstappen. To that, Peter, you respond how, sir?
Well, it's just, I've said it before. The booing, I think, is absolutely terrible. It's unconscionable because it will lead eventually to something nasty happening. The more the crowd, the fans, the TV audience, whatever it is, are incited to do that, the worse it's going to get. And we need to jump on it right now. Somebody from Liberty needs to say, this has got to stop. This is how it's going to work, or whatever. We need to get all the top drivers saying in some sort of video, no more booing. This is not good. We need to have the so-called rivals with their arms around one another and say, look, we're all friends here. That's what needs to happen, in my opinion. I think it's absolutely terrible. And for people not to respect Lando's ability is just, they might as well go and watch some other sport, because they obviously haven't been watching Formula One with any sort of detail. He's not good on slow circuits. Is that what they're saying? I thought he won Miami last year. Did he not?
No, I think the knock on him.
I thought he won Monaco. He's pretty good. I think
he's
you're saying he's a fast car merchant. It's not fast car merchant.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So is Max Verstappen. He wasn't in a quick car in qualifying. He couldn't get out of Q1. No, Max can only drive when he's got a fast car with lots of grip. He's hopeless when he's got no grip. He couldn't even get out of Q1. Couldn't even beat Liam Lawson. Beaten by both the Racing Bulls. He should retire. People are ludicrous, aren't they? In some of the judgments they make. But where's the difference?
But to that point, Peter, if I'm going to push back on you respectfully, isn't it a difference in extents and not kinds? Given some of Max's performance earlier on in the season, Japanese Grand Prix when he had no right to put it on pole and did it, notwithstanding, similar thing around Saudi Arabia, British Grand Prix pole, that Lando and Oscar to a certain extent have all season benefited from fast car privilege and very nearly wasted it.
Yeah, but that's an obvious point, but Formula One is about teams. It's about the team you drive for. Every car is different, and the Red Bull is different from the McLaren. And of course, I would never say Lando Norris is as good as Max Verstappen. And if he won a world championship based on the best driver of the year, of course, it's Max Verstappen. But what's the point of doing that? That is not the world championship. That is not the way it's set up. And for whatever reason, and good luck to him, Lando Norris has found himself in a very, very good McLaren, part of which is his own making, because he's been with that team for a long time, and he's benefiting from that. Good luck to him. Why do people want to criticize that? If he's going to win the world championship because he happened to be in the right place at the right time and grow with the team organically, and he's been in with Zach Brown since, age dot, fair enough. Give him credit for that, and give him credit now for the way he's driving. I think he's doing a great job.
He's been really good, particularly over the past 3 or 4 Grand Prix, and I've got to give him credit for that. But last Grand Prix at Mexico, Lando said something similar, didn't he? He said, I don't know why I'm getting booed, to which the Mexican journo present said, well, I can explain it to you. Go back to Monza and the invert position order that Oscar Piastri got, because you had a 5.9 seconds slower pit stop. It's the perception that McLaren have been putting their thumb on the weighing scales of competition. And I don't think fans like that.
Well, the people that are booing don't know the full story, obviously, and it's just infantile behaviour, in my opinion. And as I say, Formula One, I think, should take a step forward now to stop all that. It'll get out of hand if they don't.
Sadly, and I agree with you, Peter, but sadly, it feels like that's not going to happen. In fact, per Liam Parker, Chief Communications Officer of the commercial arm of F1, in a recent interview said that F1 is not a sport, it's content. And if Stefano Domenicali were here, my boss, then that's exactly the words that he would say. Does that mean then, Peter, that F1 potentially is going in the wrong direction in taking a step towards the Netflixization and Drive to Survive and encouraging this footballification of Formula One, do you think?
Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, Liam Parker may say that, but everybody who competes in the pit lane and in the cockpits of the cars knows that it is a sport, and it's a very, very difficult sport. They don't go around thinking, oh, this is entertainment. I mean, Oscar Piastri didn't think when he went down by the pit wall into turn one at the restart with Kimi Antonelli to his right, having been very slow away from the restart. He didn't think, I'm going to go for this because this is great entertainment. And if I get a penalty, it'll create lots of headlines in Australia. That's going to be good for the sport. That's going to be good for the entertainment. He's a racing driver. He just got on with it. You know, people on the sidelines love to talk about the difference between sport and entertainment, and they have done for many, many years. I remember Jim Clark always in his books and interviews used to say, you know, it's so sad that Formula One is only ever on the front of the newspapers when a driver is killed, and it's never in the sports section. And so it's always been a shift. You know, there's always been things going on about Formula One where people on the outside have tried to pigeonhole it in one area or another. The reality is, of course, it's an athletic sport from the point of view of the drivers. From the point of view of the engineers, it's an incredible scientific engineering, NASA-like project. From the point of view of the marketing people, it's the biggest commercial thing on the planet Earth. From the point of view of the commercial rights holders, it's entertainment, and they want it out there on the big screens. And so everybody has their own viewpoint. I don't think that's surprising, and I think that's completely logical. What I do maintain is that we should stop this booing business, because eventually there will be some incident and maybe somebody will get hurt. And then all of a sudden there'll be a massive overkill panic about we've got now to put the spectators another 300 miles away from the track so that nobody can throw anything, and we're going to have to put barbed wire fences around everything. And it'll get worse. They need to get on top of it before something happens, in my opinion.
Very well said. Very well said, Peter. Go on then, let's double click on Max Verstappen's performance, because we talked about it earlier on. Cover your ears, Max Verstappen naysayers, because D1 level max glazing incoming. I didn't think that he had a chance at the start of the Grand Prix, Peter. Even starting from the pits, P20. I know that Max has that in his locker. P17 to P1 last year, and then you've got 2016 into Lagos. Max is a brilliant, brilliant driver. Was that, though, his best drive at Interlagos that you've seen career to date?
Well, he says, I mean, hard to beat last year, wasn't it? And others as well. Yeah. But you say from the pit lane, actually, as soon as I heard he's starting from the pit lane, I thought, yes, we could have something today. If he was starting P16, I would have been nothing like as confident or as excited, because starting P16, as we saw, the sort of Lewis Hamilton area, is the place where you're always going to get involved in some sort of first corner shunt in Brazil. So in the pit lane is a great place to be, unless you're going to be on the front 2 or 3 rows, maybe the front 2 rows. Better to be in the pit lane, away from it all. Keep the car undamaged and have a nice clean start. As it happened, there was so much debris that he got a puncture anyway, but you know, that could have happened even if he'd started P2, P1. So yeah, I think starting from the pit lane was a great thing, actually, and it was a very good decision by Red Bull. Obviously, it was a pretty much of a no-brainer, wasn't it, in terms of the new power unit? But from there, he was faultless, wasn't he? Absolutely faultless. And I think it was because he was so happy at last to feel that he had some grip on those medium tires. And the more he drove on the medium, the more the car felt like a racing car again. And because of that, he could just mentally relax and just drive the car. Qualifying, I think he was very stressed because he just didn't have any feel. And he arguably maybe didn't get the best from the car. I mean, the second run in Q1, he was just so late on the throttle in sector 2, just to make sure he had no understeer, no oversteer, and just trying to keep the thing as neat, as tidy as he could. But it was just bog slow. But that wasn't the case, obviously, when he got onto the mediums. And you could tell it in his tone of his voice. He was much more relaxed. It was the real Max. Yeah, and, you know, and Brazil's a great place to have that sort of race if you're Max, because it's a great passing circuit. You got two good passing spots, and he was just good everywhere. No mistakes really, none at all. Right at the end when the softs went off, yeah, he had a few jinks, but then the softs were going off, and what could he do? So yeah, just a fabulous drive by Max, and great to see it. It could have been a completely boring race, couldn't it? But it was just one of the greatest. The only thing it didn't have, as I say, was rain. If it had rained, it would have been even better, I think. But anyway, we won't go there.
A rising Max Verstappen tide, Peter, floats all F1 boats. I'm baffled by the way that this dude at this juncture just makes the impossible seem almost routine. It's almost like, and again, after the fact, Max Verstappen naysayers will say, well, he had a super fast car. This was Lewis Hamilton 2021, a brand new power unit, etc., etc. But the odds makers had him as a 45-1 outsider to win a race, and he was this close, Peter. This close.
Yeah, I don't understand the business about the power unit because, yeah, the power unit's more reliable if it's new. I'm not sure it has any more power, maybe a little bit more, but don't forget he was quickest on the straight anyway. So why was everybody excited about the power unit change? I don't think that made any difference at all. It was all to do with the tyres suddenly working, coming into their window, and Max just suddenly had a race car. And had he, as I say, if he'd run mediums in Q1, probably, I don't know whether he would have got out of Q2, maybe not, I don't know. But he would have got involved with the first corner accident from the middle of the grid, I don't know. But we could see, the medium tyre was really good on that Red Bull, and he just made perfect use of it. His overtakes were excellent, and around the outside of George didn't make it that easy, did he? But just fabulous grip going in there. You can see how wide he was going in there as well. That was another clay. You know what? Don't worry, George. This is where I turn in anyway, mate.
Brilliant. Are we ready to have the greatness, the GOAT conversation, Peter, around Max? Where I know you don't like to do this comparative across eras, but is Max in the conversation to be one of, if not the greatest F1 peddler of all time now, do you think?
Well, I haven't changed my mind about Max. I think he's certainly one of the greatest of all time. And right now, for sure, he's the greatest of this era. But again, as I say, it's very difficult to compare Tazio Nuvolari with Fangio, with Alberto Ascari, with Niki Lauda, with Mario Andretti, whoever you want to compare them with, because all the tools that Max has got and the environment in which he's racing are so different from those of Alberto Ascari that we just don't know how Alberto Ascari would have adapted to the electronic steering wheel and all the driver aids that we have and the way the cars are now, or indeed how Max would have worked in in an old Alfa Romeo with no brakes and gearbox falling apart and no seat belts and open to the elements. He probably would be great, just as Ascari would be great in a Red Bull. I don't know. But who would? We can only talk about it in the pub over a pint, can't we? Because that is not real. It's not real. It's just fun chat. All you can say is right now, nobody better on the planet Earth. There's nobody better than Max, that's for sure, in terms of getting the best from a Formula One car. Or indeed any racing car. The only guy to win a race in a Ferrari this year is Max Verstappen.
Peter, let me double click on that, because you said best era, and I can hear Mama Cameron and so many Sir Lewis Hamilton fans saying, how very dare you, Peter Windsor, talk about Lewis so in a way that's so blasphemous. 7-time champion, isn't he the greatest of the era, Lewis Hamilton, notwithstanding his underperformance over the last
I did
few
say
years?
right now, and right now in this era, there's nobody better than Max Verstappen. Right. There was a time when there was nobody better than Lewis Hamilton, for sure. But that's no longer the case. I think Max is better than Lewis right now. You can't. There's no way Lewis Hamilton is as good now as he was in, say, 2021 or 20.
Peter, I desperately didn't want to talk about this topic with you because it's the wound is still too raw.
No, it's only because he thinks about his racing more than he used to. It's not an age thing. He's got older and therefore he's slower. It's just that when you do get older, you think about things a bit more, particularly if you're a racing driver. When you're younger, you just go, right, this is the way to go. It's quicker. Go for it now, flat. when you're older, you think, if I go for it, what could happen? If I don't go for it, what could happen? And then the moment's gone. That's all. You just think about it more.
So
He's still fired up. He's still emotional. He's still motivated. He's still all of those things, but he thinks about it a bit more. That's all. And Max doesn't really think about it. If there's something that is going to work, he'll do it now, because he's almost robotic in the way he operates as a racing driver in the car and with the engineers. This will work. This will not. This is what I want. Don't waste time talking about that. And it's very, very impressive to see, because all the decisions he makes seem to be correct about everything.
Per Zach Brown, he's not bad, this Max guy. He'll do very well.
I'll tell you something else.
Pete.
Just to finish that. And I don't think it's helped Lewis. Of course, he was fed up at Mercedes and he got the Ferrari offer, and Ferrari, in his mind, with the red cars, the F40, the pasta, the clothing, whatever it is you love about Italy and all the stuff that comes with being a Ferrari driver. How much actually did he think, but I've got Charles Leclerc in the other car. What is that going to do to me as a racing driver? He probably thought, well, I'm a 7-time champion. He's never won a championship. He's obviously very quick, but I should be able to have Charles, no problem. That's probably what he thought. I don't know, I may be wrong. In which case, that's why he's not as good as he was, because it's been a shock to him how good Charles Leclerc is. And those of us on the outside, who are privileged to look in, knew how good Charles is and know how good Charles is. And that, that's the sort of decision that Max wouldn't have taken without really thinking about it. Max would think, if he was offered the Ferrari drive now instead of Lewis, he would think, yes, this is good, that's good, that's good. Charles, I can do him, no question. But the guy is very quick. He drives the same way as me, probably, but he knows the team. He's quite political. It's too much aggro. I don't need all that aggro, that guy being so well entrenched. No, I'll stay where I am. That's probably the way he would think. Or can I get Ferrari to give me another driver in the other car? Whereas Lewis just went in head first. Yeah, Charles Leclerc. Yeah, no problem. I'm not saying he said no problem, but it looked a bit like that, didn't it? Hadn't been thought through, and that's part of the reason Lewis thinks about things a bit more now, because he keeps thinking about why Charles is doing a better job.
This is But what if, go on then, Mr. Windsor, if I play devil's advocate, what if you're Sir Lewis and you're rounding third base on your career, and your bucket list item has always been to drive in the red car with the yellow badge and the black prancing Corsa top? Doesn't it make sense to tick that box? The risks associated with Charles Leclerc be damned.
Absolutely, but don't expect people to say you're the greatest driver of the era anymore. Just say you were the greatest driver and you deserve your lovely holiday time in the autumn of your career at Ferrari. Enjoy. We love you, Lewis. We'll enjoy everything you do in the car. We'll cheer for you. If you win a race, it'll be brilliant. Everybody be happy. We don't have great expectations. Go for it. That's how it should be. Not, he's a 7-time champion. He should be easily beating Charles Leclerc. He should be winning races, winning championships. He's as good as Max Verstappen. No, it's not going to happen.
Peter, what are we doing here?
And I said that at the time. If Lewis goes there just thinking, I'm going to have fun now, and I've always wanted to drive for Ferrari and relax, that's the best way he'll get the best from himself. If he goes there with any sort of more serious plan, it's going to end in tears, because it ain't going to happen. And if it's a very, very good car next year, Ferrari have the best car, as good as the McLaren is now relative to its opposition, you still got to beat Charles Leclerc,
It's not an easy ask, is it? No small feat.
It's not. He doesn't have Antonio Fuoco in the other car.
This is true. Go on then, mister. Let me try and play devil's advocate on this, because I've been wrestling with the Lewis Hamilton underperformance all season long. And I know that it's a hard one, Peter, this. But I know that the headlines will read something like, there are no Ferrari drivers ever in history who have gone 21 races in their first season without scoring a podium. That's the first one. The second one is that 64 points is what separates Lewis from Charles in the championship, and that none of that is good reading, especially against the backdrop of Ferrari paying $70 million US dollars to Sir Lewis for that level of underperformance. I understand it. And marketing can only go so far. Sometimes, per John Alcon, you need to go out there and win races. But if you look at the underlying performance, Peter, earlier on the season, it was 0.3, the delta between Lewis and Charles in qualifying this time round, than it was earlier on in the season ad nauseum. but slowly, bit by bit, it feels like in terms of absolute terms performance in qualifying, Lewis has slowly been taking bites out of that to where it was 0.3 and then it became 0.2 and then it's been hovering around 0.1, maybe 1.5 tenths. Is Lewis, if we're going to talk positive Lewis Hamilton news, do you think Lewis, as far as the underlying story that is Charles versus Lewis, do you think Lewis is now making progress and could potentially in 2026 go and deliver upon the promise that was the 8th in 2021?
Well, it kind of depends on how good the car in 26 is. As I say, if it's a championship winning car, it's going to be very difficult for Lewis to beat Charles to the championship. Almost impossible, I would say. If it's a bad car, I suppose there's a bit of a chance that Charles will think, I've had enough of this, and just his mind will wander to something else, to driving for Mercedes or Red Bull or whatever it is. And maybe Charles' performance might drop away, enabling Lewis to look a little bit better alongside Charles. That could happen, I guess. But then for that to happen, Lewis has got to drive a really bad car on the limit. And I'm not sure at his age and experience, he's going to be up for that yet again after everything he went through in 22, 23, 24. So I think the answer to your question is no, because if Lewis was ever going to really take it to Charles, even in 2025, he should have been out qualifying Charles at least 40% of the time. And yep, Charles still with his experience and all the rest of it, the other 60%. But Lewis with his 7 world championships, the greatest driver of his era, at one point should have been out qualifying Charles 40% if he was going to be starting to dominate him in 2026. And that hasn't happened. I mean, yes, he's got nearer to Charles, give or take an odd Charles spin that brings out the yellows in the last minute of practice or whatever in Mexico. But he's never really outshone Charles to the point that Jackie Stewart outshone Graham Hill in his first season in Formula One at BRM, for example. Or even Graham Hill, when he went back to Lotus, out-qualified Jim Clark several times. But we haven't really seen that from Lewis Hamilton, have we? No. We haven't seen Lewis Hamilton doing what Graham Hill did in 67 even. So there's no reason to think that it's going to change in 26. As I say, it might change if Charles just goes completely off the boil in 26 because the car's a complete dog and they're qualifying, they're struggling to get out of Q2 at every race. Lewis might be the guy that gets him out of Q2 and his stats against Charles, or out of Q1 rather, his stats might look a bit better. But that'll only be because Charles is so annoyed with everything that he's not even thinking about it anymore.
And to that point, Peter, there's been a lot of chatter about Jean Todd's son, Nicholas, that he's now purveying the competitive landscape and shopping Charles Leclerc out to other teams potentially. Question I want to ask you, should Charles Leclerc leave Scuderia Ferrari at the end of next year? Do you think there's a greater risk now from staying than there is from Charles leaving?
Well, the first thing is, I'm sure Nicholas Todd's always been out there talking to everybody on Charles' behalf, just seeing what's available, what isn't. So if he isn't, he wouldn't be managing him. So, and he's a good guy, Nicholas Todd. I got a lot of respect for him. Well, it all depends how good the car is. You know, if the Ferrari's a great car next year, why would Charles want to leave the team? He wouldn't. If the car's horrendous, of course, he'll want to be, you know, from the third race onwards, when it's very clear Ferrari are going to be struggling all year, he's going to be out there trying to get into a Mercedes or a Red Bull or a McLaren or wherever, anything better than a Ferrari, for sure. And it won't be about money. It'll just be about the best team car that he can possibly get that is available. He won't worry about who's in the other car either. It won't be a factor for him. He'll just want to get into one of those top 3 other cars as quickly as possible for 27. But he doesn't know any more than, you or I know what the cars are going to be like in 26. So he has at the moment to think, well, could be Ferrari got a car, may not be a championship winning car, but I might win 4 or 5 races next year, in which case stay calm and go for it. But in the meantime, Nicola can be out there talking to Todd, Brown and, Meckies.
Yeah. as it sounds like you might well be doing. And I think that's the move now for Charles. He's got to pervade the.
When I say Todd, sorry, I meant Toto Wolff. Actually,
yes,
was what I meant. Sorry.
Yeah, it's fine. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
So go on then, Peter. Let's talk about Oscar Piastri.
Yeah.
Because many people have said that at this juncture, given his poor form over the past 4 races, that it's almost disingenuous to argue that he hasn't been affected by the pressurised circumstance that is going for his maiden win in the drivers. Is Oscar Piastri now, because of aforementioned form, out of the Drivers' Championship, or do you think he can still turn around that 24-point deficit to his teammate Lando Norris?
Championship, I mean, the race, the Brazilian race, from Oscar's point of view, was kind of a microcosm of the way the championship's going, isn't it? At one moment he was a bit nearer to Lando. He was never really going to put him under pressure, but after that first corner shunt at the restart, he was up there in P2 and pushing, behind Lando, but then it all just fell away. In this case, with the penalty and a bit of car damage and so forth, a bit like the championship itself. So yeah, I would say it is over. To be honest, I can't see, unless Lando has a problem, power unit, oil leak, whatever. I can't imagine he's going to lose it now, and it's going to be Oscar actually defending P2 in the championship from Max Verstappen if Max has 3 good closing races. But Lando just has to cruise it now to win the title, and he'd be happy to finish second to Oscar if necessary in one of these upcoming races, just to consolidate, and no big deal for him. Why not? So yeah, it's been a disappointing year, and when you mention this recent run, one has to think back to Mark Webber's comment after Baku when he said, "Oh well, he's human. Everybody makes mistakes. It's a one-off race." Well, guess what? It wasn't a one-off race. It was the beginning of a trend which has never really got any better, and that's something that it's very unusual to have seen that. Quite often you see that with a number 2. I mean, a Perez ebbs and flows when he's alongside Max, has a couple of wins, and then sinks without trace, and then comes back towards the end of the year when it's contract signing time or something like that. But with it's very unusual to see somebody as dominant as Oscar was and as quick as Oscar was, just going off the boil like this. And he's never done it at any stage of his career, as far as I can see. He's very resilient to all these sorts of things. In terms of his emotions, he's pretty steady and pretty calm. But I think he was unjustly penalised yesterday. I really do. I mean, you can look at it from a point of view of the first corner incident and say, it was a racist thing, and why should a guy get a penalty for going for a gap? And isn't that what racing's all about? Isn't that what Ayrton Senna always said? There's a gap, I'm going to go for it. And why should we have rules that penalise a driver? And I think, we're all probably divided about that. On the one side, there's the stewards and the FIA and the people that fuel them. And on the other side, there's the rest of us that like motor racing. But as I say in my video last night, to me, that incident was not confined to what we see on all those replays going into the first corner. That incident began as they were coming up the hill before the pit straight, before the long straight leading downhill into turn 1. And it happened behind Lando Norris, who once the safety car's gone in, he's now in control of the race. And he's going as slowly as he possibly can, just to sort of make sure everybody's nervous about what he's going to do next. And it's interesting because if you look at it, Antonelli at one moment accelerates quite hard, almost as if he's anticipating the moment when Lando's going to do it, and then he brakes. And Lando, I don't know whether he saw that in his mirrors or he's just feeling it instinctively, but at the millisecond that Antonelli does that, Lando's off and floors the throttle. And he's away. And Lando did that absolutely perfectly. Just brilliant restart from Lando Norris, I thought. Antonelli, a complete mess as far as I could see, because not only did he do that, but he was in third gear and not second.
Tough.
And he said afterwards, and I'm still trying to work this out, he said afterwards, I had too much wheel spin at the restart. Now, I thought, well, maybe I'm being unfair. Maybe he felt that the car was going to wheel spin a lot. And to avoid that, he went into third gear. He went up the hill in third gear and started in third rather than second to avoid the wheel spin. But my question is, how did he know that he was going to have too much wheel spin? Because before the restart, how would he know that? You can't judge that just by coming out of the slow corners and doing a bit of a burnout or whatever he was doing. And I've got wheel spin there. I better start in third. I can't imagine it was that. So why did he do that? And then he was very slow when he accelerated because he was in third. Lando's off. Oscar and Charles and everybody behind him, Hadjar and all those guys, they're all in second, as is George, of course. And they're all immediately going 8, 9, 10 kilometers an hour quicker than Antonelli. And that exponentially becomes larger as they go towards the start-finish line, the safety car line. By the time they get there, it's like 10 kilometers an hour difference between Antonelli and everybody around him.
Yeah.
And what's that all about? All because he's in third gear. I don't get it. Nobody mentions that. The stewards presumably didn't even look at that. I don't know why. And all of a sudden you've got Piastri, who's going really quickly. The only place he's got to go is down by the pit wall, which is absolutely filthy. You can see all the stuff coming up, all on the left front tyre. And as he goes in, obviously he makes allowance for it. But even then it locks up the inside front. And he gets the penalty for that, basically, because Antonelli has caused such a massive speed differential for everyone around him. And he says quite glibly, 3 into 2 doesn't go. Well, it's only 3 into 2 because you made a terrible start. Yeah. And I think that needs to be looked at, because I'm shocked that the stewards didn't look at that in more detail.
I think the stewards, as per usual, got confused with a couple of different things. In the first instance, trying to follow the rules and regs to the letter of the law, and I think they're always subject to interpretation. And then in the second instance, they got there was misdirection. They got confused seeing plumes of smoke coming from Oscar Piastri's car. Therefore, that must mean, Peter, that he didn't have the car under his control. And I just think there were shades of grey in there. And again, the community's come out roundly and said that penalty was far too harsh for Oscar, if necessary.
Well, he shouldn't have got a penalty at all. If anybody should have got a penalty, it should have been Antonelli for causing that whole thing. He was the guy that effectively caused an avoidable accident by being so slow and in the wrong gear, as far as I can see. I'm happy to be corrected if there's a reason why he was in third gear. I thought, maybe he lost second. Maybe he couldn't get second. But then guess what? On that racing lap, he's down to second gear for sector 2. So actually, when everybody else is in third, interestingly enough, and George is in second, so it's not a Mercedes thing.
Yeah, and even with that being said, Peter, surely Oscar Piastri sufficiently alongside Kimi Antonelli going into turn 1 to have deserved himself some racing room now. If we're leveraging,
absolutely. I mean, as soon as Antonelli could sense, which would have been instantaneously, that he was slow and everybody else around him was much quicker, and there's a big speed differential going on. As soon as a driver you sense that, and you've got a narrowing entry to a corner coming up, you just stay absolutely where you are, because you know there are going to be people on your left and your right. It's a restart. You know that. So all you can do is just go in on a constant radius thing and leave everybody room. Otherwise, there's going to be contact. That's just normal racing. There's nothing unusual. If you make a slow start, you just sort of sink in the cockpit and you just wait for everybody to settle around you. You don't then shut the door, assuming there's nobody there.
Yeah, cars don't just disappear into
space.
I mean,
and Oscar obviously ran wide. There's no doubt about that. But, why? Because he was going for a gap that should have been larger because of Antonelli making such a slow start. Yeah. I mean, I guess what you say is correct. The stewards probably may well have looked at all that and said, there's no rule against being in fifth gear if you want at a restart and being really slow if you want. Well, my reaction to that is, if there isn't, there should be a rule, because that's unnecessarily dangerous speed differential at a restart when the field is bunched. It shouldn't happen. I mean, the difference in speed was much greater than you'd ever get in DRS.
Yeah, no, it's a good shout, Peter. But that being said, I feel like we're about to bury the lead, because nobody's talking about Kimi Antonelli and his and the turn 1 incident, or at least not as much as they are about a potential as versus a coming out party from Kimi Antonelli. That this is his Max Verstappen 2016 interlockers, because I thought Max was going to nobble him, Peter. I would have if I were.
No, but his tyres went off. He would have if he'd had the same grip when he was chasing George, but his tyres went off, and that's why the last 2-3 laps he was losing grip quite a lot over those 3 laps. And all Kimi had to do, and he did it incredibly well, was keep his head, not make any mistakes, and let Max do the pass if he was there, and Max being behind him, of course, it didn't help either with the tyres. So that's what happened there. And Kimi did a good job in defence. But we're told that defence isn't important. We've got to have lots of overtaking. Nobody likes defence, apparently. Yeah. Oh, well, you and I should remember this one. This great drive by Kimi was all about defence in the last 5 or 6 laps. Yeah. And look how much everybody loved it. There's another argument never to have any DRS.
Well, we're going to get that next year, aren't we, Peter? Along with a
well, very sadly we are. Yeah.
Very sadly. Different bits and bobs. Go on then, Peter. Is it round third? I wanted to ask you a couple.
I just want to say this also. Kimi. It was interesting how Kimi basically did George all weekend through sector 2. And that is obviously a slow sector. And that's what we've been saying all the time about Kimi, that he is very, very good on slow corners and he's got a very nice touch. But it was interesting when Max was behind him, how much earlier Max's rotation point, he was creating that rotation point, much earlier turning. Maybe he had more grip at that point, the red tire because the mediums are also going off on Kimi's car for sure. But it was interesting. So Kimi still got quite a lot of area in which to develop as a driver, even on slow corners, because it's not often we've seen him that, lap for lap for lap compared with Max. And it was still quite a big difference. Not as big as the difference between George and Max, though. That was ginormous. George was way out on the transition point or turning in, and Max was sort of a car width inside him every corner. It was unbelievable to watch.
Let's double click.
Except at turn 1.
Let's double click on that, Peter. Talking about, in the first instance, is Max the tightest of tight line drivers? And in the second instance, what's aside from the Lando Norris de-risking, the additional incremental risk that comes with being a super wide line geometric racing line driver, what are the upsides from being as tight? You have the obvious one that you're travelling less distance, that there's...
first of all, Max is better at doing that than anybody else at the moment. Charles is not far away. Charles is very, very near him. He makes more mistakes because he's a more emotional driver and he's subjected in his mind to more external things. So that's where Max is better. But in terms of technique, I don't think there's that much difference between Charles and Max. But having said all of that, as I said earlier when we were chatting, turn 1, if you looked at Max at turn 1, you wouldn't have said he was a short corner driver at all, because he's actually very wide entry into turn 1. But I've explained why he was doing that, why I think he was doing that. But going back to your point, corners are there to separate the straights. The car performs best on a straight. So it's logical that you want the car to spend as less time in the corner as possible, and you want therefore to extend the straight as much as you can. So if you're going into a corner, say what that 90-degree right at the top behind the pits there, when they had that long fast right area and then they go into that one, if you extend the straight a little bit more, you're just turning the wheel slightly, but you're still holding throttle, you're coming out of the throttle slightly, and you're starting to load up the lateral load, and then you're starting to brake against lateral load without getting any understeer. That is the key, just to be able to get the front to bite, but to extend the amount of time you're staying more or less flat on the throttle, and then go in, as a result of the trajectory you're taking, going into a very, very slow minimum speed rotation point. And every corner has one of those. It's when you think, this is the moment when I just got to turn the wheel and do it at the slowest speed that the car will allow me, or the highest speed the car will allow me to do it. In Max's style, he doesn't care about how slow that is. Once he's done, he's gained all his speed going into that point, and then he just has a really slow minimum speed, rotates the car, and then he just wants the car dead straight as soon as possible so he can extend the length of the straight on the exit of the corner as well for the next straight. He's extending that one. So that's basically what he's doing naturally without thinking about it. But in order to do that first part where he's going in and he's starting to have to brake against that lateral load, as distinct from braking in a straight line and then turning in, just coming a little bit overlap perhaps, but basically you're braking in a straight line and turning in relatively wide and getting on the power as soon as possible. In order to do what Max does, you've got to have unbelievable feel for the rate at which you can release the brake pedal pressure against the increasing steering load that you're putting through the car. And that is where the skill is. It's all in the footwork and to some extent the handwork, but much more in the footwork. the line, as I say, is kind of secondary to all of this. It's how you balance the car with your feet, all the dynamic weights. And it's all to do with the rate at which you come out of or into and then out of the brake pedal pressure, and the same with the throttle. And that's where Max is just superb, as is Charles Leclerc, as was Lewis Hamilton. But Lewis now drives more conventionally in a straight line wide. Now, what Lando was saying was that he basically does that conventional thing. He likes to brake as late as he can, turn the car, and then get the power on as soon as he can. Has a relatively wide turn in, a geometrical apex, and then he just has a sort of curved exit. What he's now saying, which is kind of the opposite to Max Verstappen's whole world of how to drive a racing car, is, oh, well, of course, that leaves quite a lot of exposure, because if I'm braking as late as possible, I might catch an edge with my left rear. I might do something. I might brake a little bit too late. The car might be unstable. I might not be able to get the power on. I might have a half spin going in. So to minimize that, I'm going to start turning into the corners a little bit earlier, so I've got a bit more room when I'm doing my braking stuff, and then I'll get on the power and I'll just give myself a bit more margin. I'm not saying he doesn't drive to the limit of the track. All I'm saying is he's going a little bit earlier. In Lando's mind, he's giving himself more margin in which to operate. In reality, he's just playing around with lines in a way that Max would think, what's that all about? It's all, Max does it all with his feet, not with lines. That's where I think a lot of people don't understand what he's doing. And he naturally has this, what Lando is perceiving to be a bit more margin for error, because that's the way he always drives. You very rarely see Max in a straight line, braking late and then catching a left rear as he's turning in. It never happens, because he's never that near the curb on the outside anyway. He's always going in early. And he just does it naturally because it's the fastest way to drive, not because he wants the margin for error. Whereas Lando's doing it because he wants the margin for error, and he's probably going a bit slower than he would if he was driving in his own natural way. So, yeah, I think Lando's universe is kind of completely opposite to Max Verstappen's when it comes to driving a racing car. Now, I'm not saying that Lando's wrong. I'm just saying it's not as good. That's all I'm saying. And there are many drivers who've won world championships driving the way that Lando Norris drives. And good luck to them. Carlos Sainz drives in a very similar way to Lando Norris. And, he's won a lot of Grand Prix as well. Not a world championship, but he deserves to at some point, I think.
Yeah.
So that's what's going on there. And I think with Oscar Piastri, I think he was a little bit more of the Max ilk, but I think it's all kind of been drained out of him by all the amount of telemetry he's had to look at to do with Lando, the way McLaren work. And now he's a sort of clone version of Lando, but not with Lando's finesse. He doesn't have the same input, finesse or coordination of Lando at the moment anyway, driving the way he is driving, relatively straight line entries and wide entries. He's not as supple and as soft on his inputs as Lando.
I wanted to ask you about
Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%, Peter. It's a really good explanation. I wanted to ask you very quickly about Lando and his renewed focus on the processes, ignoring almost completely the outcomes. I mean, there's a story about him removing the lap time delta during his qualifying because he just feels like that's noise, an unnecessary distraction.
Good.
It feels like Lando's evolving and progressing, that he's moving in the right direction now.
Well, he hasn't sent me the email saying, thanks, Peter, for that advice. But, I guess it's coming at some point. This is what he should have been doing from the start of the year, not worrying about all that stuff and just focusing on his side of the garage, not even looking at Oscar's telemetry, just doing what he does and feeling the car the way he wants to feel it. Absolutely the correct way to go. You don't want all that delta stuff. You don't want any data at all. Just drive the car. Yeah. That's how you get the best from yourself. That's, if Lewis was doing that at Ferrari or had been doing that, then I think he'd be the better driver now. He'd be a better driver for it now. Because from day one, he's presumably been looking at all Charles' telemetry and wondering how Charles does it.
Oh, Peter, this is chaos. I thought we were done with the Lewis Hamilton slander.
It's not slander. I love Lewis as well. I think he's a wonderful guy and great racing driver. I just wish everyone would get off his back and allow him just to enjoy his life. And if he wants to be a second slower than Charles Leclerc, let him. If he wants to be a 10th slower than Charles Leclerc, let him. If he wants to go a bit quicker than Charles, let him. But just enjoy this great driver having this wonderful time in his career at Ferrari, and let's everybody get off his back and stop expecting things from him. I think that's the problem. There was no way he was ever going to blow Charles away. So just relax and enjoy seeing him in a Ferrari in the red overalls, eating the pasta and, discovering some new techno funk Italian music or whatever he's doing. I don't know.
I think the issue with Lewis, and again we're dotting around here, but you can hear it in his comments after the race where he talks about this was a dream and it's now turning into a nightmare. That this is the dichotomy of the Lewis Hamilton experience, because he expects it, quite rightfully some will say, of himself as a seven-time champion. Not necessarily to go and beat Charles, but be closer to Charles in the championship than 64 points adrift, sadly.
I don't know. He didn't want George in the other Mercedes. He wanted to keep Valtteri because Valtteri was no problem for him, and George was always going to be quick and spiky and difficult, and not difficult as a person, but difficult to beat. And so it proved, and he didn't enjoy it. So he went to Ferrari and he got Charles Leclerc in the other car. Forget about the color of the car or the Ferrari thing. If you don't want George, why would you want Charles? It doesn't make any sense. I suppose he could have thought, well, Charles is a bit older, he's a bit more mature, he's been around, we're both intelligent people, we'll get on, it'll be great, blah, blah, blah. But for me, it was never going to be, and I said so at the time, it was never going to be what a lot of people thought, i.e. Lewis going there and winning races and championships. No. Don't forget, he did win the sprint race in China, so we should give him credit for that.
And he was going well around Mexico before
he was.
Charles Leclerc.
Yeah, he was. And he wasn't slow in the build-up to qualifying in Brazil either. It just, it just didn't come together, did it? It was, I don't know, there seemed to be a lot of traffic when he was out, and he was saying on the radio, he said, what did he say? It's always the same or something, or it's happened again or something like that.
Charles Leclerc's binned it in front of me and brought out the yellow flags. That's my
well, that was Mexico, yeah. But in Brazil, there was something he said. It was like, you guys always have me out at the wrong time. Or so, I think that was the implication of what he was saying. I don't know whether I'm right there or not.
He's not.
But I thought it was interesting that Mercedes had their cars out on a relatively clear track, whereas Ferrari didn't.
Oh, he's not being helped by the team, is he?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you say that. But then Lewis has been around long enough and he's got so much road dust and so much experience. Why isn't he getting hold of all of that on his side of the garage and just telling him what to do? Now, if he wants to go out, go out. If he wants to run mediums and they wanted to run hards, run the mediums. What's the point of having Lewis Hamilton if you don't give him at least a certain amount of rope on which to be Lewis Hamilton?
Yeah. He's trying, Peter, and sadly failing. As we round third proper this time, Peter, let me ask you one final question about Oscar Piastri. There's a lot of talk, and again, the booing that we spoke of earlier is they do it under the aegis of perceived favouritism. If you were Oscar Piastri's team manager and he loses the championship in 2025, do you think he's got do you think he would be being of rational mind to engineer himself a move away from a McLaren that, in his own mind at the very least, only acts in Lando Norris's best interest?
I don't know. That's a question that's tied up with so many convoluted things that have happened. McLaren had a great race team with Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris, and they broke it up because Oscar was quicker and a better bet for the future, even though they had Lando, who was their boy and been with them from, since he was in the crib. And so they did all that, and they got him out of his Alpine deal and put him in the car. And now it's going Lando's way, Oscar having won races. Is this because McLaren are favouring Lando, which they kind of expected from day one anyway, but then they stopped expecting it when Oscar was so quick, and now he's not quick. And everybody's confused. And it's all because they broke up a really good partnership, which was Lando Norris, Daniel Ricciardo, which was Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz. You break something up like that, and it will always be a mess, as it is. And now I imagine Oscar and his people don't really know. Is it me? Is it the team? Are they doing something? Are they not? Why am I making mistakes? Why am I crashing more than Lando? So many things can come into it now. And one thing leads to another. And it all helps Lando with his momentum. So all I would say is it's proof yet again that there's nothing to beat a well-balanced team. There's nothing to beat Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez. There's nothing to beat Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz. and there's nothing to beat Lando Norris, Daniel Ricciardo. And the minute you mix it all up and you put George Russell with Lewis Hamilton, it's always a mess. And nobody ever learns from that. Everybody's always out for blood, always saying, oh, the second guy's too slow. You've got to get a much quicker driver in the other car. You know, you've got Max Verstappen. Why do you need a quicker driver? You've got Lando Norris. Why do you need Oscar Piastri? They went to all that trouble to get him out of the Alpine contract when Alpine had actually announced him as the race driver for 2024. He was the race driver for 2024. They got all that trouble to get him out, went to the courts, the whole thing. And now look, it's a mess. You know, why do that if you think he's going to be hurt by Lando Norris being the number one driver, which presumably is what a lot of Oscar Piastri people are saying now. And as I make my point, if he'd just stayed with the flow of the river and he'd done that 1 year at Alpine, he'd probably be in a Mercedes or a Ferrari now because he's that good. But as it is now at McLaren, where it was always going to be difficult for him to beat Lando Norris and all the momentum behind Lando because he'd been with the team for so long, it's a bit of a question mark now. If you're Toto Wolff now and you need to find another driver very quickly, and you know, would you push massively hard to try and get Oscar Piastri? I don't know. I don't know what people think about Oscar now in Formula One. People change very quickly, don't they? And that's a very bad thing that they do. But what is the perceived feeling about Oscar now? How quick is he? Is he the next, you know, Michael Schumacher? Is he the next Jack Brabham? Is he the next Alan Jones?
I mean, if you have this conversation now, it's a very different entity from if we had the conversation in the first half of the season, right?
Obviously, but that's why you and I are doing this, because we're trying to see through all the fog and the smoke and to see reality as distinct from what everybody talks about in very short-term perception. And I think what I guess I'm saying, and I'm just listening to myself talking, is that it's probably damaged Oscar's self-belief at the moment. And I think that's a very, very bad thing to happen for a racing driver. And, you know, that should not have happened. And I don't believe if he'd done that one horrendous year at Alpine, which it would have been, obviously, and then gone somewhere really good, because he would have had an opportunity to show his talent for sure, and then gone to, say, a Mercedes or a Ferrari, I think it might be different. I think the problem in always said going to McLaren was always going to be relatively difficult for him because of the lineage that Lando Norris has there with Zach Brown and the team, and the understanding, and the fact that is, you know, that car, partly Lando should get credit for how good that car is. It's not as if he just sat on the sidelines with no input over the last 4 or 5 years. So, you know, was it worth it is what I'm saying, bearing in mind he is that good, Oscar, but he's not able to show it at the moment.
Yeah.
He looks like Jochen Mass alongside James Hunt, doesn't he, at the moment?
I think it would have been worth. I think the juice would have been worth the squeeze had Oscar won the Drivers' Championship. But now he's 24 points behind. It's like, well, maybe Mr.
I thought you were going to say, I think the juice would have been worth the squeeze if at the end of 24, Lando Norris had said, I can't handle this anymore. I'm out of McLaren. Oscar can have the team. Then it would have been worth it.
Yeah.
You know, then it would be worth it. But yeah, obviously when Oscar's winning, it's great. And when he's not winning, it's a problem. And that's an obvious point. But you have to look at the whole history of the thing and how and where it's gone wrong. You know, it really started, I guess, with that false start in Baku.
Yeah.
Because he qualified quite well there. But you know, what was that all about?
He's a bit he can be a bit peaky, Oscar, as far as his form. Some McLaren fans say, like he's very resilient, of course, but when he gets into a bit of a rut as far as his performance, if past his prologue, he struggles sometimes to drag himself out of there, and especially given the circumstances, Peter. I am being drowned by Lando Norris adverts, whether it's Air Wallix, whether it's Hilton, whether it's Ralph Lauren, Monster. He's almost the representative of McLaren in all these adverts. I never see Oscar Piastri there. So when Oscar Piastri, of course, who will also be bombarded by this commercial image of Lando Norris, that he is the prodigal son, that he's the McLaren guy, I think that's got a...
But the Oscar that wins races and is very cool and is Mr. Frank Gardner, Mr. Jack Brabham or Sir Jack Brabham is the guy who, on seeing Lando in the Hilton ad, saying, I'm glad it's him and not me. You know, I can just go home and have a quiet time with my family and prepare for the next race. That's what we do, mate. Go surfing or whatever, hit a few cricket balls. I don't think that's a worry to him at all. It may be now, but I don't think it would have been when he was the real Oscar. And as for your previous observation and the fans saying that, you know, he's a bit sort of not resilient enough, and when things don't go well, I mean, that's just an observation of what's going on at the moment, because there were moments in the first half of the year when he didn't have a great qualifying or whatever, or this or that, and he was right straight back. I don't think that's a fair comment to make about him, certainly in terms of the first half of this year, or indeed anything that happened prior to this year. It's only an easy comment to make now, because obviously Lando's going well and he's not, and it's getting worse. So everybody's saying, oh, well, he can't handle it very well. Of course they're saying that, because that's what's happening. But it's, you know, it's no good saying it now. If you want to say something like that, you've got to say it in advance of it happening, and then it means something. But now it's a different story. And now it's Lando's McLaren team, which is what it should have been all the time. It's just that it's taken Lando quite a long time to get that back again into that sort of harmony. But this is the team that Carlos Sainz knew about when he was there, and Daniel Ricciardo knew about when he was there, and Oscar came in free and easy, no thoughts about anything other than just happy to be driving a great racing car. And every time he got in the car, it was just pleasure for him. Didn't think about things very much, probably didn't study too much telemetry or whatever, and let it go in one ear and out the other if he did. And we're just having fun and driving beautifully. But obviously now it's started to change. And I think you can see a quantum shift in his style of driving as well. As I've always said, you know, these first 2/3 of his first year at McLaren, he was definitely turning in earlier than he does now, which is always an external sign of how well your rates of input are synchronizing with those of the dynamic forces around the car. And he was doing that, and he was looking really good. And then all of a sudden, towards the end of last year, and certainly going into this year, he became much more of a Lando Norris-like driver, and he wasn't being natural with the way he runs the car, drives the car. And there was a lot of cross-referencing, I guess, of telemetry. Well, Lando's braking here, you're doing that. All that goes on. That's how the engineers operate. That's their main bread and butter, isn't it? And I don't think Oscar's responded very well to that, because he's a very natural driver that needs not to be worried about all that stuff. That's my take on it. And I just wish he'd stayed at Alpine for that year and got himself into a Merc or a Ferrari or some other team. And grown organically with the team, rather than go to this whole sort of vortex of Lando Norris, McLaren.
As per usual, Peter, I don't think you're a million miles away there. Just to the resilience chat, I was one of those who, looking at Oscar in the first, let's say 2/3 of the season, thought that Oscar Piastri was more resilient than Lando. And my friend Mahad of McLaren Fan TV corrected me, and he said, no, don't be deceived by Oscar's countenance, that because he's so stoic that you should put some more respect on Lando's name, that he is very steely and he does have that resilience, more so than even Oscar. And that, Peter, I'll hold up my hands and say that's a massive surprise to me. I didn't think that was, I thought that was a million miles away from the truth, that Oscar Piastri was much more resilient than Lando. And apparently it's closer than I gave Lando credit for.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Lando's always had that steeliness. And it was, when he was in Formula 3, that was the first time I started watching him, and he was going very well in Euro F3. I got to meet him a few times, and I remember having a very brief dinner with him in Barcelona when he was in F2, GP2, F2, whatever it was then. And I remember thinking, this guy he's right on it. I'm talking to him, but it's almost as if he's in another world of comprehension, and I'm just, whatever I was, some sort of journalist asking me a few questions, and his mind was razor sharp focused on something well above my cerebral zone. And it's the sort of thing, I was trying to think of the right driver to compare him with from my experience. It's certainly not James Hunt, because James was much more articulate and able to run at a different number of levels at any given moment. And he could talk to a 5-year-old child as easily as he could talk to a race engineer or a team manager. And that was James Hunt. There's a steeliness. It's the right word, definitely. There was a steeliness about him that to some extent reminded me of Jody Scheckter.
Oof.
That you never really knew what Jody was thinking or doing, but very, very quick when he got in a racing car. And it was a little bit of that, but there was a charisma as well of a sort of, and don't misquote me here, but the sort of feeling I used to get watching Ayrton Senna when he was in Formula 3 as well, and how Ayrton would be, how he'd walk around the paddock, the things he'd look at, and the way I imagined his brain was working. I kind of got that feeling from Lando as well at that point of his career. And I just thought, well, whenever I try to talk to Lando, I always get quite nervous, because I think he's a total megastar. And I've always felt that about him, always felt that he's got this charisma to him. And yeah, he's got these nice traits where he's a bit human and he's a bit self-deprecating, which is charming in its way. And no surprise now that that's coming out. All that stuff, that steeliness stuff is coming out now, because he can sniff the World Championship. He can sniff everything, and he's doing everything like a racing driver should. He's got that steeliness. He's always had that. But I think he's just got a few more character things around him that sometimes disguise it, maybe in the way that, disguised it for you.
Whereas for me, Peter.
Oscar, I think is much more, I'm not going to say simple because it's the wrong word, it's much more straightforward. I think he's just a cool, laconic Australian guy that comes from that world of sport and doing as well as you can, but being able to shrug off big things quite easily. Yeah. But not because they don't matter, but because he's an athlete and he knows that he's just got to get on with it. Steve Waugh type, Ricky Ponting type approach.
Stoic. More for me, Peter. Yeah. I didn't see. I'd leveraged all of that Lando Norris stuff, the British Vogue, the self-deprecating manner, compared that unfavourably to the likes of Senna and Schumacher and Seb and Lewis before him, who didn't have that, and figured, well, Lando doesn't look and feel like a champion, so therefore maybe he isn't one. But again, more for me, Peter.
Everybody's different. Everybody's different. Lando's background is very different from Michael's, very different from Lewis's. You can't really compare. If you're looking into those sorts of windows, you can't really compare them, because Lando's so different. Yeah. Lando's background's so different, just as Lewis's is so different. So you've got to take all that into account if you want to start doing that. All I've ever said from Lando's point of view is, he's a good-looking boy, he's a star, Sky TV love him. And I was saying this around, I don't know if it was April, May, I think, when we started talking about it. The best thing he can do now, if he wants to win the championship and beat Oscar Piastri, is just focus on his side of the garage. Forget about looking at too much telemetry from the other side of the garage, and get off social media and just be Lando Norris racing driver, the guy I've just described in Formula 2. Be that guy. Try to recapture that guy, or be that guy. Just get rid of all the crud. And I think he's doing a pretty good job of doing that now ever since the August break. He's done a pretty good job of that.
Apparently so. Noted and taken heed. Apparently, Peter is. He's been.
I'm sure good. I wasn't the only person saying that, so
He's not been bad. And on that bombshell, Mr. Windsor, you've been an absolute legend as per usual. More than generous of your time. If you're watching this and you are not subscribed to the Peter Windsor YouTube channel, then what are you doing with your life? Go and do that now. Shortly thereafter, if you ingest any of your F1 podcasts on Apple Podcast or a Spotify, then it's the Short Corners podcast. That is the pick to click. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, do me and yourself a favour. Like, share, subscribe, all of that gubbins. Mr. Windsor, you're a legend as per usual. I'm privileged to bear witness, sir. It's an honour as per usual. Between now and next time, ladies and gentlemen of the F1 jury, the prosecution rests. No further questions, Your Honour.